Right now, at this exact moment, there are 23 supertankers sitting idle in the Persian Gulf. Not because there's no oil to carry, not because there's no demand, because no one will insure them. Lloyd's of London, the institution that once insured the Titanic, has quietly tripled its war risk premiums for any vessel transiting within 250 nautical miles of Iranian coastal waters. That's not a policy document, that's a confession. What you're watching isn't a regional conflict. It's the financial system pricing in a war it hasn't officially declared yet. This is the last move, and you haven't been told what it means for your money. Most people think war is fought with missiles. The serious players know it's fought with actuaries. Here is what's actually happening in the Gulf right now. Since January, Iranian-linked proxy forces have conducted what Western naval intelligence classifies as harassment operations against commercial shipping. 14 documented incidents in Q1 alone. These are not accidents. They are calibrated, small enough to stay below the threshold of formal military response, large enough to make underwriters sweat. War risk premium for a Strait of Hormuz transit, 2021, 0.25% of hull value per voyage. 2023, 0.3% of hull value per voyage. Current Q1 2025, 0.7 to 1.2% of hull value per voyage. For a $150 million supertanker, that's $1.8 million added to the cost of a single trip. Before crew, before fuel, before the cargo owner's own insurance stack. Now multiply that by every barrel of oil, every LNG shipment, every container of rare earth minerals moving through that choke point. 21% of global oil supply, 18% of global LNG, one choke point. The Strait of Hormuz is not a geographic feature. It is the world's most critical financial valve. And right now, someone has their hand on it. Iran's strategy is not conventional. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has spent 2 decades studying how to fight a superpower without triggering the retaliation that would end their regime. The answer they arrived at: economic asphyxiation through maritime chaos. Mines, drones, speedboat swarms. Seized vessels held for days, then quietly released. Just long enough to spike premiums, reroute traffic, and force European underwriters to recalibrate their entire Gulf portfolio. This is the insurance war, and it's already costing the global economy more than most kinetic conflicts of the past decade. Let's be precise about what war risk insurance actually means in practice, because the financial press treats it like a footnote, and it is anything but. When a shipping company wants to move a vessel through a contested waterway, they don't just call their standard marine insurer, they go to a specialized market, dominated by Lloyd's of London syndicates and the Scandinavian P&I clubs, and they purchase what's called a war risk addendum. This addendum covers the vessel against seizure, mines, missiles, and what the policy language calls warlike operations. In normal conditions, this is a formality, a rounding error on the voyage P&L. What's happened in the Gulf over the past 18 months is that this rounding error has become the dominant cost variable in the entire shipping equation. Here is the mechanism that nobody is explaining clearly. War risk premiums are not set by governments. They are not set by military assessments. They are set by underwriters, private individuals and syndicates at Lloyd's, who are reading the same intelligence reports as the Pentagon, running their own actuarial models, and making daily decisions about what price makes the risk worth carrying. When those underwriters start declining to write coverage entirely, not raising the price, but refusing the policy, that is a more honest signal than anything you will hear from a defense ministry briefing. In October 2023, following the Hamas attack on Israel, the Joint War Committee, the Lloyd's body that designates high-risk zones, expanded its listed areas in the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden for the first time in years. Within 72 hours, 14 major shipping operators announced route diversions, not because of a military order, because of an insurance designation. That is the power of this market, and Iran has studied it with precision. The IRGC does not need to sink ships. They need to make ships unsinkable in the financial sense. Too expensive to insure, too risky for operators to justify to their boards, too uncertain for cargo owners to commit to. A vessel that can't get insurance doesn't move. A vessel that doesn't move is a weapon, pointed at the global supply chain, that Iran never has to fire. Washington has a problem it won't say out loud. The U.S. Fifth Fleet, based in Bahrain, commands 30 years of dominance in these waters. The most sophisticated naval force in human history, and it is strategically paralyzed. Not because of Iranian missiles, though those have improved dramatically. Not because of proxy networks, though those now span 5 countries, because of the math. Intercepting a $2,000 Iranian drone requires a $3.5 million Raytheon SM-2 missile. The U.S. Navy has been running this arithmetic in the Red Sea for 18 months. The Houthi campaign alone has consumed an estimated $1 billion in U.S. naval munitions, defending commercial shipping that generates a fraction of that in annual U.S. economic value. Iran read this playbook first. They've been refining it ever since. The U.S. has 2 carrier strike groups within operational range of Iran. Iran has 3 separate proxy forces capable of acting without direct IRGC command authorization: the Houthis in Yemen, Kataib, Hezbollah in Iraq, and IRGC-linked maritime militias operating inside the Gulf itself. Each is a match. Any one of them can light the fuse. A classified U.S. naval threat assessment concluded that any escalation beyond current harassment operations would result in Strait of Hormuz closure for a minimum of 14 to 21 days before international interdiction forces could restore transit. 14 days of straight closure. Brent crude at $140 minimum. European natural gas futures spike 60%, Asian manufacturing enters emergency conservation protocols. Global shipping insurance, effectively unavailable at any rational price point. This is not a war scenario. This is a 14-day math problem with a $7 trillion answer. There's a dimension to Iran's proxy architecture that Western analysis consistently underweights. These are not simply client militias that Tehran directs like pieces on a board. They are franchises, semi-autonomous actors who share ideology, training, and weapons pipelines with Iran, but who also have their own political interests, their own local constituencies, and their own red lines. This matters enormously for the Gulf calculus, because it means that escalation can be triggered by actors who are not directly controlled by the decision makers in Tehran. The Houthis in Yemen have demonstrated this repeatedly, conducting operations that Iran's leadership almost certainly did not authorize in their specific form, timing, or target selection. This creates what military strategists call the attribution problem at scale. When a vessel is struck in the Gulf, Washington must answer 4 questions simultaneously. Who pulled the trigger? Who gave the order? Who knew? And, critically, what response is proportionate without triggering the broader war that both sides officially claim they don't want? The answer to all 4 questions is almost never clean. And in that ambiguity, Iran's strategic position is strongest, because ambiguity paralyzes response, and paralyzed response emboldens the next operation. Each incident that goes without clear attribution and clear consequence lowers the threshold for the next one. This is not chaos. This is a deliberate erosion strategy. The IRGC Quds Force, the External Operations Branch, has spent 30 years building exactly this kind of deniable pressure architecture. They have refined it in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen. The Gulf maritime domain is simply the latest and most economically consequential theater. Here is the part that the financial networks won't connect for you. Every dollar of war risk premium added to Gulf shipping is a vote against the stability of petrodollar architecture. The petrodollar system, the arrangement since 1974 in which Gulf oil is priced and traded exclusively in US dollars, is the single most important structural support for dollar global dominance. It is also under the most sustained attack it has faced since the system was constructed. China is now settling approximately 20% of its crude oil imports in yuan, up from effectively zero in 2017. The Saudi-China petrol-yuan arrangement, denied, then confirmed, then minimized, represents the first structural crack in 50 years of Gulf dollar exclusivity. Iran, under maximum U.S. sanctions, has pioneered the full operational playbook for oil revenue entirely outside the SWIFT system. Now, here's the convergence point. When Gulf instability rises, 3 things happen simultaneously. 1, oil price spikes. This exports inflation globally. Every nation that buys energy in dollars absorbs the shock directly into their currency and cost structure. 2, safe haven demand for gold accelerates. Gold has outperformed every major asset class in every Gulf crisis since 1973. That is not coincidence. That is structural. 3, non-dollar oil settlement becomes more attractive. When the dollar-priced system creates pain, alternatives gain legitimacy they cannot earn in calm conditions. Gold is currently trading near $3,100 per ounce, within range of its all-time high. This is not a speculative bubble. Central banks purchased a record 1,037 tons of gold in 2023 and maintained elevated acquisition through 2024. The buyers, China, India, Turkey, Poland, Singapore. These are not retail investors chasing momentum. These are sovereign institutions positioning for a world in which dollar supremacy is no longer the default assumption. The dollar's role in global oil trade is not simply a matter of convenience. It is a structural mechanism with profound geopolitical consequences. When oil is priced in dollars, every country in the world that needs energy must first acquire dollars. This creates a permanent structural demand for U.S. currency that has nothing to do with U.S. economic performance, U.S. interest rates, or U.S. trade balances. It means that the United States can run persistent current account deficits without the currency depreciation that would punish any other nation. It means that U.S. Treasury bonds have a captive buyer base because the countries accumulating dollars to pay for oil need somewhere to park them. It means that U.S. sanctions carry extraordinary force because being cut off from the dollar system means being cut off from the global energy market. This is what economists call exorbitant privilege, and it is what the current Gulf turbulence is slowly, methodically dismantling. The numbers are not yet catastrophic. The dollar still dominates roughly 80% of global oil invoicing. But the direction of movement matters more than the current level. In 2015, WAN oil settlement was essentially zero. Today, it is 20% of Chinese crude imports. In 2019, no Gulf state had publicly discussed non-dollar energy trade. Today, Saudi Aramco has completed WAN-denominated deals, and the UAE dirham has been used in LNG settlements with India. These are not isolated experiments. They are proof-of-concept operations for parallel architecture. And every time the U.S. uses dollar system access as a foreign policy weapon, every new sanctions package, every SWIFT exclusion, every frozen reserve, it accelerates the search for alternatives among countries that are not currently the target, but can clearly see themselves becoming one. Iran is the laboratory. The rest of the world is taking notes. And here, in the Gulf, is where that repositioning is being stress-tested in real time. Donald Trump has made 3 distinct public moves regarding Iran in 2025. Each one has been reported as bluster. None of them are. In January, the administration reimposed maximum pressure sanctions and added 17 new entities, including 2 based in the UAE and 1 in Germany, to the Iran oil revenue restriction list. In February, the State Department quietly notified 3 major tanker operators that government-affiliated insurance indemnification would be suspended for Gulf transits above a defined risk threshold. In March, leaked Pentagon planning documents indicated an updated strike package targeting Iranian nuclear and IRGC naval facilities had been submitted for presidential review. This is not a chaotic administration making random threats. This is a pressure campaign designed to force one of two outcomes. Outcome A: Iran returns to nuclear negotiations under terms favorable to Washington, freezing enrichment above 60% in exchange for partial sanctions, relief, and implicit Gulf security guarantees. Outcome B: Iran miscalculates, conducts an operation that crosses the undefined red line, and Washington acquires the justification it needs for strikes that set the nuclear program back by an estimated 3 to 5 years. Tehran knows this geometry, which is why Supreme Leader Khamenei has publicly authorized back-channel negotiations while simultaneously directing the IRGC to maintain maritime pressure operations. He is playing for time. Trump is playing for the endgame. What is not being reported, or being reported only in fragments, is the degree to which back-channel communication between Washington and Tehran has intensified in the past 60 days. 3 separate intermediaries are currently active. Oman, as it has been for decades, remains the primary diplomatic corridor. Qatar has re-engaged after a period of reduced involvement. And a European track, involving Germany and France, has been quietly reconstituted following the collapse of the 2022 JCPOA revival talks. These channels are not producing agreements, but they are producing signals. The signals from Tehran are consistent. Iran will negotiate on nuclear enrichment timelines if, and only if, the economic pressure is reduced in verifiable front-loaded steps. Not promises of relief contingent on compliance. Actual sanction rollbacks before Iran moves on enrichment. Washington's position is the mirror image, verification before relief. The same fundamental disagreement that has killed every negotiation since 2003. But there is one new variable in this cycle that did not exist in previous rounds. Iran's economy is under more severe strain than at any point since the Iran-Iraq War. Inflation above 40%, currency at historic lows against the dollar on the black market, youth unemployment at levels that are generating visible domestic instability. Khamenei is 85 years old. The question of succession is no longer theoretical. It is active. The next supreme leader will inherit either a negotiated arrangement that provides economic breathing room or a confrontation that could end the Islamic Republic in its current form. That is the clock that Washington is watching. And it is the reason the pressure campaign, whatever its tactical fluctuations, will not be abandoned. The question is, who runs out of moves first? Here is what the institutions are not telling you. The volatility in oil markets, the whipsaw between $78 and $87 per barrel across the past 6 weeks, is not organic price discovery. It is the market pricing of probability distribution. Every morning, traders are answering one question. What is the likelihood that the Strait of Hormuz is still open in 90 days? Right now, that probability is high, not certain. High. Smart money is not predicting a Gulf War. Smart money is hedging against one. Central banks are buying gold at a pace not seen since the Nixon shock. Energy companies are locking in multi-year supply contracts at above market rates. Shipping operators are rerouting vessels around the Cape of Good Hope, adding 14 days and $700,000 per sailing, rather than transit waters where their insurance is a negotiation. When the people who physically move the world start rerouting it, the financial world must eventually follow. The scenario we've described, an insurance war, a proxy network below the retaliation threshold, a dollar architecture under structural pressure, 2 governments in a game of attrition neither officially acknowledges, is not a tail risk. It is the base case. Hard assets outperform paper in this environment. Short duration positions outperform long duration. Commodity-linked economies outperform import-dependent ones. None of this is advice. All of it is arithmetic. So here's the question we leave you with. If the institutions with the best intelligence, the longest time horizons, and the most to lose are quietly repositioning, what are you doing? Watch war risk premiums from Lloyd's. When they breach 1.5% of hull value, Gulf transit economics fracture entirely. Watch Brent crude options skew, the 3-month 25 delta risk reversal. If it crosses ABCEG 2019 levels, you have 48 to 72 hours before institutional repositioning hits equity markets. Watch central bank gold purchases from the World Gold Council. Any acceleration in Chinese or Middle Eastern sovereign buying is a leading indicator of confidence erosion in dollar architecture. But more than any chart or data point, watch who moves first. Because in this game, the last move belongs to whoever still has a piece on the board. The insurance war is only the surface layer. Beneath it runs something older, something that most financial analysts refuse to name because naming it requires admitting that the architecture they've built their careers on is not permanent. The Bretton Woods system ended in 1971. Most people know that. What they don't know is that its replacement, the petrodollar framework negotiated between Nixon, Kissinger, and the Saudi royal family in 1974, was never a formal treaty. It was a gentleman's agreement, an arrangement maintained not by law but by mutual interest and the implicit threat of American military guarantees in the Gulf. For 50 years, that arrangement held. What you are watching right now, in the insurance markets, in the shipping lanes, in the central bank gold reserves, is the moment when mutual interest is no longer sufficient to hold it together. The Saudis are not abandoning the dollar, not yet. But they are diversifying away from exclusive dependence on it. That is a different thing, and in the long run, it is more consequential. When the anchor currency of global energy trade becomes one option among several rather than the only option, the exorbitant privilege Washington has enjoyed for 5 decades begins to erode at the margin. Not collapse, erode. And erosion at the margin of a $100 trillion global financial system is still a multi-trillion-dollar shift in where capital flows, where it earns returns, and who controls the leverage. Here is what that erosion looks like in practice. Right now, today. The Bank for International Settlements published data in late 2024 showing that the share of global foreign exchange reserves held in dollars had declined from 72% in 2001 to 58% in 2024. That is a 14 percentage point decline over 2 decades. Slow, steady, largely unreported. In the same period, gold's share of global reserves increased from roughly 10% to over 17%. These numbers don't move in straight lines. They move in steps, each step triggered by a crisis that accelerates the underlying trend. The 2008 financial crisis was one step. The 2022 freezing of Russian sovereign reserves was another, the moment when every non-Western central bank in the world was forced to ask a question it had never seriously considered before. If Washington can freeze Russia's $300 billion in reserves overnight, what prevents them from doing the same to us? The answer for many of those central banks was nothing. And so they bought gold, physical gold, not paper claims, not ETFs, allocated bars in their own vaults beyond the reach of SWIFT, beyond the jurisdiction of New York clearinghouses. That is not an investment decision. That is a geopolitical hedge. And the Gulf, with its insurance wars and its proxy networks and its 21% of global oil supply, is the pressure point where that hedge is being tested. Let's talk about the specific trigger scenarios that no one in mainstream financial media is modeling publicly. Scenario 1. A Houthi missile or drone strike hits a U.S. naval vessel in the Red Sea. Not a near miss, a hit with casualties. Washington responds with airstrikes on Houthi infrastructure in Yemen. Iran publicly condemns the strikes, but privately signals restraint. The Gulf remains open. Markets spike for 72 hours and then stabilize. War risk premiums jump 40% and stay elevated for 6 months. Gold adds $150 per ounce and holds. This is the manageable scenario. Markets have already partially priced it. Scenario 2. An IRGC naval unit, operating under ambiguous orders, seizes a vessel carrying cargo owned by a U.S.-affiliated company. Washington demands immediate release. Tehran stalls. The standoff lasts 10 days. 2 carrier strike groups move to within 100 nautical miles of Iranian territorial waters. Insurance markets freeze entirely for Gulf transits. Brent crude spikes to $110, then $125. The diplomatic back channels activate. The vessel is released. A face-saving formula is announced. Markets partially recover. But the premium for Gulf risk has permanently reset to a higher baseline. This scenario has a historical precedent. It happened in 2019 with the British-flagged Stena Impero. The difference today is that the economic stakes are higher, the proxy networks are more capable, and the diplomatic channels are thinner. Scenario 3. Israel, operating on its own assessment of existential threat, conducts strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities at Fordo and Natanz. Iran responds by closing the Strait of Hormuz and launching ballistic missile attacks on U.S. bases in the region. The United States is drawn into a conflict it did not initiate and did not fully authorize. Gulf shipping halts entirely. Oil hits $140 within 96 hours. The global economy enters a demand destruction spiral as energy costs detonate across every supply chain simultaneously. This is the tail risk, low probability, catastrophic consequence, and the probability is not as low as the market's current pricing implies.